Every Saturday afternoon at Murphy's downtown, Joseph Miller, a 90-year-old gentleman in his crisp navy blue veteran cap, would sit at his usual corner spot. The owner, Mike, always made sure his favorite customer had his preferred drink ready, a classic root beer in a frosted mug. This wasn't just any ordinary routine. It was a tradition spanning over 3 decades, marking the quiet dignity of a man who had seen more than most could imagine. The worn leather cushion of his preferred barstool had molded perfectly to his frame over the years, creating a comfortable throne for the elderly patron. The late afternoon sunlight streaming through the establishment's vintage stained glass windows cast a warm glow across Joseph's weathered features, highlighting the gentle smile lines earned through 9 decades of life. Mike had inherited Murphy's from his father 15 years ago, and Joseph had been a constant fixture even then. The old veteran never missed his Saturday visit unless he was helping another veteran in need. His presence had become such an integral part of the bar's atmosphere that newer customers often mistook him for the owner, something that always brought a humble chuckle from Joseph. On this particular Saturday, Joseph arrived precisely at 4:30 p.m., just as he always did. His measured steps, supported by a polished wooden cane with Marine Corps insignia, carried him to his spot with practiced ease. The regulars nodded respectfully as he passed, some offering quiet greetings which he returned with a gentle tip of his cap. "The usual, Joe?" Mike asked, already reaching for the frosted mug. He knew the answer but asked anyway, maintaining their comfortable routine. "You know me too well, Mike," Joseph replied, his voice carrying the warmth of aged wisdom. He carefully arranged his belongings, his worn leather wallet to the left, his folded handkerchief to the right, and his prized pocket watch, a gift from his late wife Eleanor, placed carefully between them. The afternoon crowd was light, typical for early Saturday. The soft melody of Frank Sinatra's "My Way" played from the vintage jukebox in the corner, a machine that had seen as many years as Joseph's regular visits. A few couples occupied the booths along the walls, while some younger patrons gathered around the pool table, their quiet game providing a gentle backdrop to the peaceful scene. Joseph sipped his root beer thoughtfully, occasionally glancing at the framed photographs on the wall behind the bar. Among them was a black and white picture from 1952, showing a much younger version of himself in his marine dress blues. Mike had insisted on displaying it, calling it a reminder of the quiet heroes who walked among them. His Saturday ritual wasn't merely about enjoying a cold drink. It was his way of maintaining connection with the world while honoring old memories. Each visit allowed him to observe the changing times from his constant perch, watching young couples on first dates, celebrations of life's milestones, and the steady stream of humanity that flowed through Murphy's doors. The regulars respected his space, understanding that the corner spot was more than just a seat at the bar. It was a post from which Joseph kept silent watch over the establishment, his presence adding an intangible layer of dignity to the atmosphere. Some said the bar felt different on the rare Saturdays when he wasn't there, as if missing its spiritual anchor. Little did anyone know that this peaceful Saturday afternoon would soon transform into one of the most memorable evenings in Murphy's long history, proving that even the quietest corners can become the stage for extraordinary moments. On this particular evening, the peaceful ambience shifted as 5 leather-clad motorcycle enthusiasts entered the establishment. Their leader, Derek Thompson, spotted the elderly man occupying their regular corner spot. Walking over with heavy boots echoing across the wooden floor, he decided to make his presence known. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as the usual chatter dimmed to whispers. Derek, standing 6'2" with broad shoulders and arms, covered in artistic tattoos, had never seen Joseph before. The corner spot had been their unofficial territory during their occasional Friday night visits, but today, being Saturday, they had broken their routine due to a canceled riding plan. The change in schedule had brought them face to face with the elderly veteran. Mike, behind the bar, straightened his posture, keeping a watchful eye on the situation. He knew Derek's group from their regular visits. They weren't typically troublemakers, but their imposing presence could be intimidating, especially to his older patrons. His hand instinctively moved closer to the phone, ready if needed. The four other riders spread out naturally behind Derek. There was Marcus, a former Army mechanic with a quiet demeanor. Tommy, the youngest of the group with a recently acquired motorcycle license. Steve, who worked as a high school physics teacher during the week. And Ray, whose day job as a pediatric nurse would surprise most who saw him in his riding gear. "Interesting spot you've chosen," Derek said, his voice carrying across the now quiet bar. He stood directly beside Joseph's seat, his leather jacket creaking as he crossed his arms. The statement wasn't exactly hostile, but it carried an unmistakable edge of territorial claim. Joseph took another small sip from his frosted mug, seemingly unrushed and unbothered by the looming presence beside him. His calm demeanor was in stark contrast to the tension building in the room. The jukebox, as if sensing the moment, transitioned to a slower, more somber melody. "We usually sit here," Tommy added from behind Derek, his younger voice carrying a note of uncertainty that betrayed his attempt at intimidation. The statement hung in the air, an implicit suggestion that perhaps Joseph should consider relocating. The other patrons in Murphy's had turned their attention to the unfolding scene. A couple in a nearby booth quietly asked for their check, while two men at the pool table set down their cues, watching with concerned expressions. The situation balanced on a knife's edge between potential confrontation and peaceful resolution. Derek leaned slightly closer, his reflection visible in the polished bar top. "You see, old-timer, this corner has kind of become our spot over the past few months. Maybe you'd be more comfortable at one of the tables." His tone remained controlled, but the suggestion was clear. This was more of a demand than a request. Joseph's weathered hands remained steady around his mug, his expression unchanging. The veteran cap on his head caught the bar's warm lighting, highlighting the subtle shine of an insignia pin that none of the riders had yet noticed. His posture, despite his advanced age, held a rigid quality that spoke of years of disciplined training. The next few moments would prove crucial, as the atmosphere in Murphy's teetered between confrontation and revelation. What the motorcycle enthusiasts didn't realize was that they were about to learn a powerful lesson about appearances, respect, and the quiet strength that some individuals carry within them. The situation became tense when one of them accidentally knocked over Joseph's drink. Instead of showing frustration, Joseph calmly dabbed at his sleeve with a napkin, revealing a unique set of numbers tattooed on his forearm. The sight made Derek pause mid-sentence. It wasn't the numbers themselves that caught his attention, but rather the faded emblem beneath them, a symbol he had seen before in his grandfather's military photographs. Tommy, attempting to establish his place within the group, reached for Joseph's veteran cap that sat on the bar counter. Before his fingers could make contact, Joseph's hand moved with surprising swiftness, grasping his cane with well-practiced precision. The movement wasn't threatening, but it carried an unmistakable air of authority that made Tommy step back instinctively. "Son," Joseph spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of decades, "that cap has seen things you couldn't imagine." His words, though soft, cut through the tension like a well-honed blade. The bar remained silent, every patron and staff member watching the scene unfold. Mike approached with a fresh root beer, placing it carefully in front of Joseph. As he did so, he noticed something he hadn't seen before, a small golden pin on Joseph's collar that had been partially hidden by his jacket. His eyes widened slightly in recognition, but he said nothing, stepping back to observe. Derek's attention was drawn to Joseph's hands as the elderly man adjusted his cap. Despite their age, they showed no tremor, no uncertainty in their movements. These were the hands of someone who had maintained their discipline through decades of practice. The veins that crossed them told stories of strength, and the scars spoke of battles long past. Ray, the nurse among the riders, noticed something else, the way Joseph held himself. Despite his advanced age, his posture spoke of military bearing, maintained through years of habit and pride. It was the kind of posture Ray had seen in the veterans' ward, a bearing that never quite left those who had served in the hardest of times. The atmosphere in Murphy's shifted subtly as Joseph reached into his jacket pocket, withdrawing a small worn leather wallet. The movement revealed more of his sleeve, and with it, another glimpse of that mysterious tattoo. Derek found himself taking a step back, his earlier bravado replaced by growing curiosity and an unexpected sense of respect. "Perhaps," Joseph said, opening his wallet with deliberate slowness, "you gentlemen might be interested in a different kind of story than the one you were expecting to tell today." His fingers brushed past what appeared to be old photographs, stopping at a faded military identification card. The late afternoon sun streaming through Murphy's windows caught the edge of a medal partially visible beneath Joseph's jacket, a flash of silver and blue that Marcus, with his military background, immediately recognized. His sharp intake of breath drew the attention of his fellow riders. Steve, the physics teacher, was the first to notice the dates on the visible edge of Joseph's military ID. His eyes widened as he did the mental calculation, realizing that the elderly man before them had served in a conflict that most people only knew from history books. As Joseph prepared to share his story, the atmosphere in Murphy's transformed from one of potential confrontation to profound anticipation. The bikers who had entered the bar looking to assert their territory found themselves instead on the verge of discovering that true strength often comes in unexpected forms, and real authority doesn't need to raise its voice to be heard. The lead biker, curious about Joseph's composure, demanded to know what branch he served in. Joseph quietly mentioned the Marine Corps, 1st Reconnaissance Battalion, 1950. The bar grew silent as he described his role in the Chosin Reservoir campaign during the Korean War. His words painted vivid pictures of a conflict that most of the bar's patrons had only encountered in history books. "We landed at Wrongful," Joseph began, his voice steady and clear. "Our mission was to push northward, but what awaited us was beyond anything we had anticipated." He paused, taking a small sip from his fresh root beer, his eyes focused on memories only he could see. The bikers, now completely engrossed, pulled up nearby stools, their earlier bravado forgotten. Derek noticed how the old veteran's eyes seemed to look past the bar's walls, seeing instead the snow-covered mountains of North Korea. The way Joseph spoke made it clear that every detail was eternally etched in his memory, as fresh as if it had happened yesterday rather than 7 decades ago. The temperature dropped to 40 below zero. Joseph continued, his fingers unconsciously tightening around his mug. Our weapons would freeze. The cold was so intense that the medical supplies would freeze solid. But that wasn't our biggest challenge. He paused, looking directly at Derek for the first time. We were surrounded by 8 Chinese divisions. For every one of us, there were about 8 of them. Mike, the bar owner, quietly placed a bowl of pretzels near the group, his movement careful not to interrupt the story. The other patrons had drawn closer, forming a respectful semicircle around Joseph's corner. Even the usual Saturday afternoon sports broadcast seemed to have lowered its volume in deference to the veteran's tale. "They called us the Frozen Chosen," Joseph explained, a slight smile crossing his weathered features. "Not just because of the cold, but because we refused to be broken. When our commanding officer was told we were surrounded, you know what he said?" He looked around at his now captivated audience. He said, "That simplifies our problem of finding these people and killing them." Tommy, the youngest biker, leaned forward. "How did you survive, sir?" The respect in his voice was genuine, the earlier tension completely forgotten. Joseph reached into his wallet again, carefully withdrawing a photograph so old its edges had begun to yellow. It showed a group of young Marines, their faces barely visible through layers of cold weather gear, standing against a backdrop of snow-covered mountains. "We survived because we had each other," he said simply. "When a man's feet froze, we carried him. When someone ran out of ammunition, we shared. When the odds seemed impossible, we remembered who we were." Derek studied the photograph, his eyes moving between the young Marine in the image and the elderly gentleman before him. The transformation in his understanding was visible on his face. This wasn't just an old man occupying their usual spot. This was a living piece of history, a survivor of one of the most brutal military campaigns ever fought. The bar remained hushed as Joseph carefully returned the photograph to his wallet. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting long shadows across the wooden floor, but no one moved to leave. The story of the frozen chosen was far from over, and every person present knew they were privileged to hear it firsthand from one of its survivors. As Joseph prepared to continue his tale, there was a tangible shift in the atmosphere. The bikers, who had entered Murphy's looking for their usual Saturday entertainment, found themselves instead on an unexpected journey into a piece of history that few were left to tell. Marcus, the veteran among the bikers, recognized the significance. He explained to his companions that they'd been in the presence of one of the frozen chosen, legendary Marines who fought in -40-degree weather against overwhelming Chinese forces, turning the tide of a crucial battle. His voice trembled slightly as he shared his knowledge, having studied this campaign during his own military service. "Gentlemen," Marcus began, standing up from his stool, "what Mr. Miller here went through was one of the most extraordinary campaigns in military history. The Chosen Reservoir wasn't just a battle, it was a test of human endurance." He turned to his fellow riders, his expression serious. "When we talk about true grit, this is what we mean." Derek listened intently as Marcus explained how the Marines had to battle not just the enemy, but also the brutal cold that turned every simple task into a monumental challenge. The other bikers sat transfixed as they learned how these soldiers had to break the ice in their canteens just to take a drink, and how they kept each other alive through the darkest hours. "Our weapons would freeze solid," Joseph added quietly, his hands mimicking the motion of working a rifle bolt. "We had to keep them close to our bodies, under our clothes, just to keep them functioning. The oil in our rifles would freeze at 20 below, and we were fighting in 40 below." Ray, drawing on his medical knowledge, explained to the others the devastating effects such extreme cold could have on the human body. "The fact that any of them survived is nothing short of miraculous," he said, shaking his head in amazement. "Frostbite, hypothermia, trench foot, they faced it all." The regulars at Murphy's had now gathered closer, forming an impromptu audience. Mike brought out cups of hot coffee for everyone, the steam rising in the afternoon light as Joseph continued sharing his experiences. The gesture seemed fitting, a warm drink while discussing one of the coldest battles in military history. But what truly set the Chosen Reservoir campaign apart, Marcus continued, his voice filled with admiration, was that these Marines didn't just survive, they fought their way out. When surrounded by overwhelming forces, they not only defended their positions but managed to break out while bringing their dead and wounded with them. Steve, the physics teacher, had pulled out his phone and was showing the younger members of their group maps of the region, helping them understand the tactical challenges the Marines had faced. The steep mountains, the narrow roads, the vast distances, all combining to create what should have been an impossible situation. Joseph nodded approvingly at the impromptu history lesson. "We had a saying," he added, his voice carrying across the now silent bar. "Not for fame or reward, not for place or for rank, but in simple obedience to duty as they understood it. That's why we fought." Tommy, who had earlier tried to touch Joseph's cap, now stood at attention almost unconsciously, showing respect he hadn't known he possessed just an hour ago. The transformation in the young man's demeanor was striking, from casual disrespect to profound reverence. As the afternoon light continued to fade outside Murphy's windows, the gathering had transformed into something unexpected, a living history lesson, where the past reached out to touch the present in ways none of the bikers had anticipated when they first walked through the door. The corner spot, which they had so casually tried to claim, had become a temporary classroom where wisdom was being passed from one generation to the next. The atmosphere shifts dramatically as Joseph shares stories of carrying wounded comrades through brutal cold, fighting against hypothermia and enemy fire. He speaks of losing friends but never losing hope, his voice carrying decades of both pride and pain. The bar patrons lean in, captivated by his vivid recollections. There was a young Marine named Jimmy Collins, Joseph began, his voice soft but clear. Just 19 years old, from a small town in Kansas. His feet were frozen so badly he couldn't walk. The enemy was closing in, and evacuation wasn't possible. Joseph paused, taking a slow breath. 4 of us took turns carrying him for 3 days straight. We weren't about to leave anyone behind. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Murphy's wooden floor as Joseph continued. Mike had stopped wiping glasses, standing motionless behind the bar, as enthralled as everyone else by the unfolding story. Even the usual Saturday sports crowd had abandoned their games to listen. The cold was our constant enemy, Joseph explained, his weathered hands gesturing as he spoke. We learned to sleep standing up, leaning against each other in circles of 4 or 5. If you lay down, you might not get up again. We called it the chosen circle. It kept us alive through those bitter nights. Derek, who had earlier tried to claim Joseph's spot, now sat quietly, his coffee untouched. The realization of what true hardship meant had humbled him completely. His own challenges seemed trivial compared to what these Marines had endured. One night, Joseph continued, we were holding a critical hill position. The temperature had dropped even lower, and the Chinese forces were launching wave after wave of attacks. We could hear them coming, hundreds of them, blowing whistles and horns. He paused, his eyes distant. But not a single Marine left his post. We knew what was at stake. Steve, the physics teacher, asked about their supplies during the battle. Joseph's response left everyone stunned. We had to airdrop ammunition and medical supplies. Sometimes they'd land in enemy territory, and we have to fight our way to them. But the worst was watching medical supplies shatter when they hit the ground, frozen solid from the high altitude. Tommy, the youngest biker, couldn't contain his curiosity. How did you keep going, sir? What kept you fighting? Joseph smiled slightly, the first real smile since beginning his story. We had a saying, mind over matter. If you don't mind, it doesn't matter. But the truth is, we fought for each other. Every man there knew that his buddy's life depended on him doing his job, no matter how cold, how tired, or how scared we were. He described how they would check each other constantly for frostbite, forcing each other to move, to eat, to keep fighting. We lost good men to the cold, he said quietly. Sometimes you'd be talking to someone 1 minute, and the next they'd just stop. The cold could take you that quickly if you weren't careful. Ray, drawing on his medical knowledge, explained to the others how the body reacts to extreme cold, making Joseph's stories even more impactful. The survival of these Marines seemed to defy medical science itself. As Joseph spoke, the corner of Murphy's bar had transformed into a sacred space where history came alive through first-hand testimony. His words painted vivid pictures of courage, endurance, and brotherhood that transcended the decades. The bikers and other patrons found themselves transported to those frozen hills, gaining a new understanding of what true sacrifice and bravery meant. The bikers, thoroughly humbled, learned that Joseph earned the Navy Cross for leading a counterattack that saved his entire company. More impressively, they discovered that he spent the past 40 years quietly running a veteran support group, helping hundreds of younger veterans cope with PTSD. The revelation transforms their understanding of the elderly veteran completely. The Navy Cross wasn't for heroism, Joseph explained modestly, his hands folded around his root beer mug. It was for doing what any Marine would have done. Our company was pinned down, running low on ammunition, and we had wounded men who needed evacuation. Someone had to act. His voice remained steady, but his eyes held the weight of that memory. Mike reached beneath the bar and produced a framed newspaper article, dated 1991, showing a younger Joseph standing outside the local veteran center. The headline read, "Korean War Hero Transforms Lives Through Silent Service." Derek carefully took the frame, reading about how Joseph had turned his own experiences into a lifeline for others. Every Tuesday and Thursday, rain or shine, Mike explained to the group, Mr. Miller here sits at the Veterans Center from 9 to 5. He's helped more veterans find their way back to civilian life than anyone can count. The bar owner's voice carried unmistakable pride. Some of our regulars are here because he helped them first. As if on cue, an older man at a corner table stood up. "Joe saved my life in '85, he announced. "I came back from Vietnam with demons I couldn't shake. Found myself at the bottom of too many bottles. But Joe, he understood. He knew what it was like to carry those memories." Joseph's dedication to helping others emerged as even more impressive than his military heroics. They learned how he had created a network of support groups, connecting veterans across generations. Korean War veterans mentoring Vietnam veterans helping Gulf War veterans, and so on. A chain of support forged through shared experiences. "The wounds that don't show are often the hardest to heal," Joseph said softly. "When you've seen what we've seen, done what we've had to do, sometimes the hardest battle is finding your way home, even years after you've physically returned." Tommy, visibly moved, shared that his own father had struggled after returning from service. "He never talked about it," the young biker admitted. "Maybe if he had known someone like you." Joseph reached into his wallet one last time, pulling out a simple business card. The Veterans Center's address was printed on one side, and on the back, in neat handwriting, was a simple message. "You're not alone. Come talk anytime." He handed it to Tommy. "Your father would be welcome too." The story of Joseph's continuing service to his fellow veterans spread through Murphy's like a healing wave. Patrons began sharing stories of friends and family members who had benefited from his quiet work at the Veterans Center. Each tale added another layer to the portrait of a man who had transformed his own trauma into a mission of helping others. Derek, who had entered Murphy's looking to claim a corner spot, now understood why this particular seat held such significance. It wasn't just a comfortable place for an old veteran to enjoy his weekly root beer. It was a lighthouse, a fixed point where those in need could always find their way to help. As the afternoon light began to fade, Joseph's legacy of service, both in war and in peace, stood as a powerful reminder that true strength often manifests in the quietest ways, and that some of the most important battles are fought not on foreign soil, but in the hearts and minds of those who return. The evening ends with the bikers buying Joseph's drinks, asking for his wisdom about brotherhood and courage. They become regular protectors of his Saturday ritual, ensuring no one ever disturbs the quiet hero's peace again. The incident becomes a lasting reminder about judging veterans of any age. "Your next root beer is on us, sir," Derek announced, signaling to Mike. The bar owner smiled, already preparing Joseph's signature frosted mug. The late afternoon had transformed into early evening, and the warm glow of Murphy's vintage lighting created a cozy atmosphere perfect for continuation of their newfound fellowship. "You know what the real test of brotherhood is?" Joseph asked, accepting the fresh drink with a grateful nod. "It's not just standing together in the tough times. It's building something meaningful in the peaceful ones." He gestured around the bar. "This right here, this is what we fought for. The freedom to gather, to share stories, to learn from each other." The bikers had rearranged their usual seating, creating an informal circle around Joseph's corner spot. Marcus, the veteran among them, had taken out his phone and was showing the others pictures from his own service days. The conversation flowed naturally between generations of service members, bridging gaps that had seemed insurmountable just hours before. "From now on," Derek declared, standing to address his fellow riders, "this corner is sacred ground. Joseph's spot remains his spot, and anyone who rides with us needs to understand that." The others nodded in solemn agreement, their earlier territorial concerns forgotten in light of their newfound understanding. Tommy, who had kept Joseph's business card, asked if he could bring his father to the Veterans Center sometime. "Of course, son," Joseph replied warmly. "Tell him an old Marine would be honored to share a cup of coffee with him." The young biker's eyes brightened with hope for his father's healing. As the evening progressed, other patrons at Murphy's witnessed an extraordinary transformation. The same bikers who had entered with intimidating presence now sat attentively, listening to Joseph's stories about resilience, brotherhood, and the importance of serving others. Their leather jackets and tough exteriors remained, but their attitudes had undergone a profound change. Mike brought out a camera, capturing the moment from Murphy's wall of memories. In the photo, Joseph sat in his usual spot, surrounded by his newfound protectors, his veteran's cap slightly tilted, wearing a genuine smile that reached his eyes. The image would soon join the collection of framed photographs behind the bar, telling its own story of unexpected friendship and earned respect. Same time next Saturday, Derek asked as the group prepared to leave. Joseph nodded, his eyes twinkling. "I'll be here," he replied, just like always. The bikers took turns shaking his hand, each gripped firm with newfound respect and understanding. As they left Murphy's that evening, the rumble of motorcycles was different somehow, less of a disruption and more of a salute. The regulars watched as the group formed an impromptu honor guard, waiting until Joseph had safely entered his son's car before departing. Mike, cleaning up behind the bar, smiled as he watched the scene unfold. He knew that Murphy's had just witnessed something special, a reminder that sometimes the greatest lessons come from the most unexpected encounters, and that wisdom often speaks with a quiet voice from a corner bar stool. The story of that Saturday afternoon would be told and retold at Murphy's, a testament to the enduring power of respect, understanding, and the unbreakable bonds of brotherhood that transcend generations. Joseph's corner remained his sanctuary, now guarded not just by memory and tradition, but by a group of unlikely protectors who had learned the true meaning of strength and honor from a quiet hero with a root beer in a frosted mug.